What's up everybody, it's Paul from Boosted Films, and in this video we're going to look at upgrading the stock stereo system in our 10th generation Honda Accord. Now more specifically, if you own the LX or like the lowest trim Honda Accord, you have a non-touchscreen head unit, and a lot of people like the touchscreen, a lot of people want the Apple CarPlay, stuff like that. That's something that this upgraded unit is going to provide. So we're going to dive into some details about what this unit can do over this one, and I'll give you a general review of this, of course, after it's installed. But speaking of installed, that's one of the things I really like to do is I cover details about how to install things. So what we're going to cover in this video is I'm actually going to show you how to remove your OEM head unit, and then I'm going to go over installing we won't need all of this stuff for what we want to do, but I'll cover everything that was provided with this unit. I'll show how to install this unit, and then I'll give you a review, some pros and cons, what I found after using this unit for a while in my Accord. But a little bit about this unit. This is the Roadanvi unit that I got sent to me. The screen is obviously bigger. This is the new touchscreen unit compared to the OEM. So you can see size comparison, a little bigger screen here. Again, I have the lower trim model that didn't have a touchscreen initially. So that's the screen comparison. And then the other stuff they give you is, of course, this is kind of the brains of the unit. We got this. This is where we need to do a lot of our connections, a lot of our plugins here. And then we have a lot of wires going along with it, so it can be a bit intimidating if you're not used to it when you first look at everything. But some of this stuff, again, I don't think we're going to need, and I'm going to hopefully walk you through steps of installing all the rest of it as we go. So that's about it for this introduction. Now we're going to move on to removing our OEM unit. So the first thing we're going to do is show you how to remove this OEM head unit, but before we jump right into that, just a few items. You will benefit from having these tools, like a trim removal tool or just kind of a flathead screwdriver. An 8mm socket you'll need, a 10mm deep well socket you'll need, a Phillips screwdriver, again a flathead screwdriver as well. And I would say you should plan for this to take a few hours. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually open up driver's side door and then pull the hood latch to release our hood. We're going to open up our hood and just disconnect our negative terminal from our battery right away. So your hood latch should just open to the left side here once you slide your fingers up in there to release that safety latch. Then your hood prop should be able to lift up and hold up your hood. As you can see, I have it set up here. So now we're going to move over to our battery. This has a 10mm, so this is where you can use your 10mm socket, or a wrench would work in this case, but we're going to loosen up this 10mm nut on top of the negative terminal and remove our negative battery terminal. We're going to move over to the passenger side of the car. We're going to slide back our passenger seat just to give us some extra room here. And then we're going to start removing some interior panels. The first piece is this piece here next to our cup holders. We're going to pop that piece off. And then there's the trim piece above the glove box. We're going to get, again, either a screwdriver or this plastic piece like I got here to kind of help pry that off. And that should just pull off as well. Now we're going to move to the right side here. This inner panel needs to get pulled off. I actually started pulling off that center vent a little bit too soon. You need to pull off, or you should pull off this right piece first before you end up pulling out this vent piece here on the side. You don't need to remove it all the way right now, but you'll probably end up removing it all the way anyway. So just go ahead and remove that whole right side piece, and that vent should pull out as well. But this center vent piece is actually all going to pull out too. So we're going to keep pulling this. You'll have to give it a bit of strength to pull it off, but it should just pull out. But don't pull too far, of course, because there are some wires behind. So we need to unplug these wires that plug in. There's two of them towards the middle portion here that we'll need to unplug. And then there's also one on the left side, more towards where your push button start is. And speaking of that push button start, that panel is a separate one as well that releases. You should be able to pull that free so you can leave your push button start plugged in. So you don't need to actually unplug the push button start. But there is a plug-in right by there that needs to be unplugged that goes to this center panel. So here we are, just zoomed out a bit so you can see this whole center panel that we're pulling out. And again, there's a plug-in that I am currently unplugging. It's hard to show everything super well, but I got that one unplugged. Now you can see where I unplugged it. So now we can get this center control HVAC heater control panel out of the way. Now I'm going to show you these two bolts that hold the screen in place. These are also the 8mm bolts or screws. So we're going to use our 8mm socket here and remove these two screws. Then this also pushes and pops in place, so you should be able to pry it up to pull it out. Again, I utilized that plastic trim piece tool here, as you can see, to work around the edges and pull it out to make sure I didn't break anything. And then there are two plugins, of course, as you can see on the back side of the screen. We're going to unplug those as well, and then we should be able to get the screen out and out of the way entirely once we have these plugins unplugged. So now we're back on the driver's side of the car. We need to remove some more trim pieces. So that piece we removed on the passenger side, we're going to remove that same one on the driver's side here. Lift up your center console armrest type area, and then that'll help get this other cup holder shifter console piece up. So you need to pull up on both sides to pull it free. And then after you've pulled it up to release it, you're going to actually pull it towards the back of the car a little bit to get it free from where it pushes in kind of towards the center console area. But first, of course, as you can see, we're still prying this up. And then also note that you're going to have to take your car out of park. If it's in park with this specific shifter setup anyway, you will not be able to get it free entirely doing it this way. But as you can see now, I'm actually unplugging the plugins underneath. There are 3 plugins you'll need to unplug. So you want to go ahead and unplug all 3 of those plugins. And then also the rubber piece, if you will, protective piece around the shifter handle on this one. There's some little spots where you can kind of pry that free or loosen it. So you can separate that so it can stay on the shifter itself, but then you can remove this trim piece. So I'm gonna show you that a little bit better once it's out. It's hard to show, but just know that that piece, as you can see now, that comes free. So you can get that up and out of the way, and then you can kind of actually navigate it through so it's totally out of the way once you want to lift up this larger center piece. So again, as I mentioned, you will not be able to get some of this stuff in and out with your car in park with this shifter setup. So we had to just take it out of park, and then we were able to lift up that piece. Next is this kind of center cubby area. There's 4 Phillips screws that hold this in place. So there's 2 top ones that I just removed, and now the bottom ones, you got to remove those 2 bottom Phillips screws as well. And similar situation here again, the only way to actually get this fully out is by having your car not in park, at least again with this shifter setup, depends on your transmission. But that should pretty much pull forward enough where you can get it out once you shift the car into a different gear and just pull it back out of your way a little bit. There are some plugins back here, of course, too, that we're going to have to unplug. So here's just a little better shot of those. So there's 2 main ones that I'm going to unplug. One's for that cigarette lighter, and one I think is just for a light that's in there. But then there's also, I didn't get to show it very well on camera, but I'm going to show you the backside and show you what I did here. So these USB plugins, if you just like bend these like I'm showing here, if you bend those, the USB portion, like the port, just pulls right out. So that way you don't have to worry about unplugging that part necessarily. You can just pull out that USB plugin. So that's what I did there. Next, there are all the plugs going to like the what I'd call the brains of the original head unit, the original stereo here. So there's these plugins that I'm going to unplug. And then just to note quick, there are 2 nuts right here. And then on the other side, that one's a little hidden, but right there, those 2 10mm nuts will need to be loosened up to get this out of the way. So we're going to go ahead. This is where you need a deep well because, as you can see, there were some studs basically there, longer studs. So you need a deeper socket to get in there. But you should be able to just loosen those up. You don't need to take them off all the way. Just screw them loose a little bit. That gives you some room to lift up this piece and pull it towards you, as I'm doing here, and kind of come off those studs, or those brackets, I guess. Taking the brackets off the studs. And of course, there's more plugins. It was harder to get to some of them, and some of them were just a bit tricky to get to when it was still on that stud. But you will need to unplug everything that is going to this OEM brain box here. So we're just going to go do that now. Of course, we're going to go through and unplug all those other plugins that are plugged in here. That one in particular, the last one I'm showing plugged in, was just a particular pain in the butt to get free. Of course, it's a little bit easier if you're not trying to film yourself and block your, block your shot. But eventually what I did, here you can see I got it out all the way. But eventually what I did, I'm going to show you, I just used a screwdriver, utilized that flathead again, and just pushed right on this spot. It was hard to tell where this one needed to be squeezed in, because all these usually gotta be squeezed a little bit. But this side here is the one where you need to squeeze it in, and then that should come free. But there you have it. You have removed everything for your OEM head unit. And now we have this diagram. Just going to show it for a second, but hopefully if you bought this product, you do have this whole diagram you can reference yourself. But just showing you some of the main plugins we need to utilize. It says a couple of the ports are optional. And this is kind of what I'm considering the main harness here that we really need to use. So now we're going to go to installing the new head unit. So this, again, this is the first piece I'm going to start plugging in. There's these 3 main spots we're going to plug in here. This is kind of like a jumper harness. It's so you don't have to wire anything in yourself, really. You don't have to actually cut, splice any wires. Everything is plug and play. So we plugged in that first one, the first wider one. Now we're plugging in this smaller one here. And then finally this really small one, I think if I remember right, is kind of like for the antenna. So we're going to plug this in as well. So there are 3 main ones you're going to plug in. Everything should match up. Nothing should push in too hard. You should be able to just line it up and snap it in. If it feels like it's going really hard, you might be doing something wrong. Here's the other end of the harness. We're going to plug that into the brain box of this new unit. So that again should line up and push in to the correct port. Again, refer to the wiring diagram that came with the unit. And then be sure to plug in your antenna. This other part is for the antenna here. So if you want your radio to still work, go ahead and plug that in. Next, I'm just going to run this wire right away. You might see some things out of place, by the way, like out of order in here, because I didn't have any directions when I was doing this. So I did things out of order a little bit when I was doing it, but I'm going to try to edit this whole video in a way where you can do it, hopefully just following the way I did it, if you decide to do this yourself. So we're going to run this wire down. This is the wire that's going to run the signal from that brain box, if you will, to the screen. So we just need to sneak this down and around and pull it through so we can just have it there to plug it in later. And for now, we just kind of want it out of the way a little bit so we can finish plugging everything else in. And we'll want it out of the way when we actually go to put everything back in place. So here is an important one that I didn't know I needed at first, but you need just the camera in cable on this particular wire here. So this one, as you can see, says cam in. So I'm going to remove that protective cap to know that this is the one I need. I don't need any other stuff on this one for myself because I don't have any other aftermarket stereo stuff here. All I want to do is make sure my reverse camera works. So this will help make sure the reverse cam works on my car. So there are 2 other kind of plugins you might see from this harness. The one coming from that blue piece is not the one you want. You want the plugin that's coming from the smaller gray one, if that makes sense to you, hopefully. And here you can see I'm plugging that one in, and obviously I plugged the other piece back in the back of the head unit. And you can see here that it's plugged in to, again, that smaller gray one, not the yellow cord coming from that larger blue piece. You don't actually end up plugging anything into that larger blue piece at all. At least I didn't have to for mine. Next, we have a GPS antenna. You can consider this optional. It depends if you think you'll ever use the GPS that's kind of built into the unit. But this is the antenna for the GPS. And I'm just going to show you how I did this and how I ran it, just in case you want to do that. Of course, this does plug into the back of the unit, but we're not going to plug it into the unit yet. We want to run the antenna itself first before we plug it in. So again, this is where I removed all those plastic pieces, or those trim pieces, I should say. And then I just ran this wire through the dash and ran it over to the head unit. And then as I snuck that wire through, I ran the antenna, the other portion of the antenna, up on the dash. And then you should be able to just stick that antenna down right on your dash. Next, we're going to pull out this other piece, this USB piece here, because we're going to need more room to get the new USB plugins through it. So we're going to pull that piece out. So I'm feeding these through now. You don't actually have to do that yet. They will feed through both ways, but these are other pieces I wanted to plug in. Again, this is relatively optional when you're wiring this up. It depends on if you want all three of these potential USB ports, but I went ahead and wired in all three of them on my head unit. Again, refer to the wiring diagram to see where you plug in the specific ones. The good news is I really think most of this stuff is kind of set up to where you couldn't really plug it into the wrong place. Most of it's going to fit fairly well, as long as you're not trying to really force anything into place. So here's the one other USB. So there's one USB wire that has two different USB plugins, and there's just one other USB plugin that's singular. So we're going to go ahead and run that one through as well. Again, you don't need to do that right now. You can do that again later. They do go through the other way as well. So once we plug that in, now we're going to move on to this, I believe it's the 4G antenna. So if I was paying for a 4G cellular service, I think this antenna is for that. You do the same thing here that you did for the GPS antenna. I'd recommend just running it out somewhere like where you did with the GPS antenna. And then you're going to screw that one in as well. I don't think I'll ever actually use this, but I figured I would just, hook it up right now while I'm at it. There's also a little antenna, I think 5G antenna thing that you can plug in, screw into the back of the unit. I did that here too. Now, because you did all this work and went so far, if you're comfortable with it, plug it in. I recommend at this point, before you put your whole dash together, go ahead and plug in, at least just for testing purposes, we're going to plug in the screen. I obviously didn't fully mount that brain box yet either. But it takes quite a bit of time to do all that stuff. So if you just want to test to see if you wired everything incorrectly, now is a good time to go ahead and do that test. If you want to actually start your car or turn it on, I should say, you'll need to reconnect your negative battery terminal. So you might disconnect and reconnect that terminal a couple times. Generally speaking, I try to leave that disconnected whenever you're playing with the wires themselves. Leave that battery disconnected. So just do what you best see fit. But here you go. As you can see, I just tested my unit. Just wanted to make sure everything worked like it should before I continued to put the dash back together. And I'm just going to show you the other wires that came with that I didn't use. This one, I think if I was using, I don't have a front camera. I don't have other stuff. I didn't use that. So I didn't use that harness. This item here is an external microphone. I did hook that up initially, and then I ended up changing my mind on that because there is a built-in internal microphone. Plus, I don't actually talk on my phone that much in my car, so I wasn't worried about that. There's a SIM slot plug-in you can utilize as well. Again, if you're paying for your own 4G service, I guess. And there's this other antenna-looking type plug-in. I'm not sure what that one's for, but I didn't use that. And another weird USB-looking plug-in. So I did not use any of those cables. Now we need to mount these brackets on to hold this unit in place. This unit does come with its own brackets. I don't know how good I can be at describing how to put these on, other than hopefully you can follow basically by what I'm doing right here. As you can see, the part that connects to the screen is plugged in, and I have it facing that way towards the bottom. And then you can see I have where these holes line up, and there's a little bit of overhang or a little bit of a lip, where it's hanging off. This particular bracket is hanging down a little bit, if you will. That's kind of the best direction I can give you. But these should line up. They should work okay to mount this unit back in place. So of course you need to do it on both sides, and they should look close to this. Again, hopefully you can just look at the way I did mine, and that'll help you get yours screwed in place as well. But again, the brackets came with the unit, and it also came with 2 screws that you can screw these in place as well. So of course, just get those screwed in and tightened up. Now, next, you need to kind of mount this back in place, which is a little harder than you think it would be. Mostly because there's so many wires you need to kind of work around, and of course you may not be sure which way it should go in, as I was not sure either when I first started doing this. So right now this is the wrong way. You don't want it facing this way. It's going to have to spin around. So here's my second attempt. Also make sure the other wires are out of the way. Those 2 wires there that I just stuffed up, you don't need those wires to plug into the unit. But make sure they're out there, because those plugged in to that little cubby part. But anyway, you do need to kind of tuck a lot of these wires up and out of the way and then just make sure nothing's getting pinched off when you're kind of pushing this part of the stereo unit like into place. You got to watch for these other wires again, get them up and around. As you can see, I'm moving that one with my left hand. There's some wiring harness stuff there that needs to be out of the way. So you got to just be patient, spend some time trying to get that up in place. But eventually, you know, you should be able to see, like I'm showing here, where you can slide it up over those studs and then behind those nuts that you loosened up, and then it should slide down and fall in place, as I'm going to show here in just a second. So here you can see it kind of just slide into place there. And then of course, just make sure all your wires aren't like crushed or in the way. This hole I'm pointing to right here, you need to have that free of any wires, because that's where that cubby kind of pushes into place as well. So don't have any wires in front of that. And then get all these other kind of loose wires up and out of the way as best you can, so you can make room to put these interior trim pieces back together. And here's just one final look showing what it looked like once I had mine set up and ready to go. And of course, don't forget to tighten up those nuts. Once you have it in place, you should be able to utilize your socket and go ahead and tighten up those nuts to keep that unit in place and keep it from rattling or moving around. Now we're back to that center section piece. Again, as I mentioned, those USB ports, if you remove that piece I did, they should all slide right through. So if they came out, or if you just didn't bother to put them through when you were wiring it up, that's fine. Just put them through now so you can mount that piece in place. And don't forget to plug in the two plugins going to the back part of it here. Again, one's that cigarette lighter plug-in, and the other one is, I think, just a light. I don't remember exactly what the other plugin is for, but there are two plugins you're going to plug back in. We're not going to reuse those OEM USB ports, of course, because now we have these new ones for the new head unit. And now, again, make sure wires are out of the way. It shouldn't take any force to push this in place. It should just fall in place, and then you should be able to put the screws back in. But of course, as I saw myself shift it back into gear, you will, again, need to have it, your gear selector. If you have this transmission, you'll need that gear selector pulled back so it's not in your way. But then, of course, go ahead and tighten up those 4 screws. Now I'm cutting to a comparison basically of the old OEM head unit to the new one. I was hopeful that these brackets here, these metal brackets, would have transferred over, but unfortunately they did not line up. But that's okay. I think this unit sits just fine without them, but if they would have transferred, I would have used them. But what I did transfer are these little plastic clips here, because these seem to not be included either on the new unit, and it looked like they would help hold this in place better. So these blue clips, if you will, I used something to spread them apart on both sides, pull them off of the old piece, and then I just pushed them in place onto the new one, just so these would snap in and hold in place a little better. At least that was my theory. So here you go. Now you can see I put all those pieces on the new head unit, or the new screen, I guess I should say. Now, again, depending on whether or not you removed it for testing purposes, but this is just showing the part that plugs back in to plug in your screen. And now we should be able to push it down and pop it in. Of course, make sure everything's lined up before you give it too much force, but you should be able to just push it down and have it pop in place. Now we're back to that center cup holder area, and again, you'll need to turn your car on, or at least do something to shift it out of gear in this case. And then you can see I'm pulling up that rubber plastic piece from around the shifter. I'm gonna get that up through, and then go ahead and plug in all 3 of those plugins. I didn't show plugging them in, but I think if you made it this far, you get the idea. Make sure you plug those back in. Get any wires out of the way. Those USB ones snuck down on me, so I'm gonna get those USBs out of the way. And then you kind of need to lift up towards the back of this piece and then push down, and make sure you're underneath that cubby as you push it forward. Make sure you kind of push this forward first to get those forward pieces snapped in, that snap into that cubby piece that you just put in place. And then you should be able to push it down after that. And then you should be able to hear it kind of snap in place once you push it down. Now we're going to move on to that center vent big piece with our control knobs for our heater climate controls. Of course, plug in that leftmost part first. You should be able to plug that in right away. And then we're going to plug in the 2 plugins more towards the center for our climate controls and our hazards. And then again, this is another line up and then push it in place type of thing. It shouldn't take a whole lot of force to initially get it to push in. So don't work it too hard, but just make sure it's lined up and then give it a little bit of force and you should hear it start snapping in, and then you should be able to walk around and snap it in all the places it needs to snap in. And back to that push start, we're gonna put that back in place now as well. So this is another item that should line up and push in place and snap in. Now we're in that right passenger side vent. It's a weird angled thing, but you should be able to line that up as well. Get it in place and push that in too. And now that side piece, make sure that side piece is behind your weather stripping that's in the door. You want to get that that's why I angled it in there at first. And then make sure you have everything lined up, and then it should push in place. And we're getting down to it. One of the final pieces here, this piece again, we're going to snap this one in place. Should push that in as well. Line it up, push it in. And don't forget, of course, on either side of that center console cup holder area, you got both those plastic trim pieces should push in as well. A tip for those, they kind of push in, or they pull off easier, I guess I should say, more towards the front. I had a little more room towards the front of those to actually pry those loose. But when you're pushing them back on, of course, that should go pretty easy either way once you have it lined up. Ooh, and then the satisfying part of pulling off that protective lens. Pull that baby off. And now look at your nice, awesome new unit. You have successfully installed your new stereo unit. Now, before we jump into my review, I just want to let everyone know that I did get this product sent to me for free. So just some full transparency there. And if you are interested in learning more and possibly buying, I will put a link to this product in the video description as well. Again, I just want to be as transparent about that as I can. And so I have had this in my vehicle now for a good 3 weeks. So we're going to cover some of the good and bad that I found. I feel like most of the goods are pretty obvious. Of course, it's nice to finally have Apple CarPlay and the Android Auto options. It's cool to have all the other hookup stuff, so if I was still into putting in a subwoofer amplifier, it's nice that I could actually hook that up. It is nice to go from a non-touchscreen to a touchscreen, and of course the larger screen in general is pretty nice. It does look pretty good in the car. I also do really love that you can reset your TPMS or tire pressure monitoring system. You can reset it, you can recalibrate it using this unit, which is great. I had seen reviews of other different head units where you potentially couldn't do that, but I do switch between winter and summer tires, and it seems that anytime I do that, my tire pressure light comes on. It's usually just a phantom one. My pressures are set right, but for some reason the car just is weird when it gets new tires put on. So just like when I used the old head unit to use my head unit to go to my car settings to recalibrate my TPMS sensors, I can do the same thing with this new head unit, so that's definitely a plus for me. And then I just like that it had this screensaver option just so it wouldn't be like too bright at night. Driving it at night, people I think can have different sensitivity levels to how like bright their screen is. And I found that I could set a screensaver to turn on after like 30 seconds of not touching the unit, and it would just show the clock for me. And I was like, that's perfect. That way I won't get distracted. It won't be too bright at night. So I did like the screensaver. So a couple of the bad and the things that annoy me is that this main left menu, which is also the same menu that it cycles through when you use the input button on your steering wheel, you can't change that as far as I can tell. Again, I'll update in the comments if I ever figure this out. But I'd love to be able to change that so my Apple CarPlay would be one of the inputs that it cycles through instead of like something like the video. The video one is kind of useless to me, honestly. Another thing I feel like should be a setting I can change, and believe me, I've tried to change the audio gain settings themselves and they didn't seem to make a difference. But for whatever reason, my radio is like way louder than my CarPlay or like the Bluetooth, connection. So every time I cycle from my Apple CarPlay to the radio, I need to turn the volume down like 5 different clicks to get it down to a reasonable volume because the radio is always a bit louder. It's annoying. I feel like it's something I should be able to control within this unit. And I also put the touchscreen in the bad category just because it's not, as good as an iPhone. The touchscreen is okay. It does what you want it to do, but sometimes it actually doesn't do what you want it to do. It can be a bit finicky when you're trying to swipe screens and stuff like that to have it do exactly what you want it to do. And also just the touchscreen to pull down to get your home navigation sometimes is a little bit annoying. I would like to have just some buttons that are a little easier and kind of always easier to see, but just over to the side a little bit. But that could just be personal preference too. And also with modifying the touchscreen, I'd like to be able to change my home menu, my home screen to more options. I haven't figured it out yet, and I don't think I can actually change it. Like to just have a button on my home screen, again, you know, to go to my Android Auto or the Apple CarPlay. I can't have it right on the home screen. I mean, I can swipe a few screens over and kind of leave it as my home screen, but I feel like there should be more customization options with the way you can lay out these actual screens. You can move little apps around here and there, but I haven't figured out how to like move my full page of apps from screen 3 to screen 1, if that makes sense. And finally, I have noticed that my radio signal is a bit weaker. I feel like I don't get the radio stations tuned in quite as clear, or they don't stay in tune as long as they used to. A lot of people don't listen to the radio anymore anyway, so you probably don't care, but I still do. So it did seem like something with that radio antenna is a little bit weaker now, but that's maybe something I could look into fixing as well. But there you have it. That's pretty much everything I had for this video. I hope you guys found it helpful. Of course, there's always more than one way to install and remove things. And of course, I didn't really have a whole lot of direction while I installed this. So if you found a better way, if I did something wrong, please leave a comment in the comment section down below. And that could be helpful to other people watching this video if you have something that you did that worked a little better for you. And also, if you have this same stereo unit and you have some pros and cons about it, leave your feedback in the comment section down below as well. And certainly, again, if this video was helpful for you and you want to help me out, if you do, comment, like, subscribe, all those things that we need to have done for this algorithm to push this video out to other people. If you could do that stuff too, that would be great. And I'd appreciate it if this video was helpful for you. But there you go, guys. As always, this is Paul from Boosted Films saying thanks so much for watching. I just want to say that domestic violence is never okay. If you or someone you know is experiencing issues with a partner and doesn't feel safe, please visit the website thehotline.org or call 1-800-799-SAFE.